The small Italian restaurant glowed with warm golden lights spilling out onto the sidewalk, the kind of place that invited couples to lean close across candlelit tables and pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. Inside, the clinking of glasses, the aroma of roasted garlic, and the low hum of jazz created the illusion of intimacy. But for Ethan Cole, seated stiffly at a corner table, there was no warmth, no connection, just an ache of disappointment. Across from him sat his blind date, a woman his well-meaning assistant had insisted he meet. She was strikingly beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair, a sparkling necklace that probably cost more than most people's rent, and an aura that screamed confidence. Yet every word she spoke felt like another weight pressing on his chest. "So, tell me," she said, leaning forward with painted lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "what kind of car do you drive? I hope it's not one of those boring corporate sedans. Men with money should drive something that screams power, don't you think?" Ethan forced a polite smile. "I usually just let my driver take me where I need to go." She tilted her head, lips curling in faint disapproval. "A driver? That's so impersonal. A real man should want to show off what he owns. I bet you have a yacht, though, right?" Ethan swallowed back a sigh. He had more than one yacht, more cars than he cared to count, and houses scattered across continents, but none of it mattered. Not to him, not in the way people like her always assumed it should. He wanted to talk about books, about traveling, about simple things like walking through a park on a Sunday morning. But she hadn't asked about him. Not once. Instead, she launched into a dramatic tale about her ex-boyfriend who had the audacity to buy her roses instead of designer shoes, and how she had to cut him loose. Ethan tuned out, staring into the deep red swirl of his untouched wine. His assistant had promised him that dating again might ease the loneliness he carried, but if anything, it made the emptiness louder. His mind wandered. His parents had passed years ago, his brother lived abroad, and his closest companions were colleagues who only ever saw the CEO in him, not the man. Even his penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and skyline views, felt like a cage of glass. He wondered, not for the first time, if he was destined to grow old with nothing but silent boardrooms and empty dining tables. The clatter of a tray breaking pulled him out of his thoughts. A waitress had stumbled nearby, dropping silverware across the tiled floor. Ethan instinctively leaned down to help, but before he could stand, a voice, gentle, soft, almost like a secret, brushed against his ears. "You okay? You don't look like you want to be here." Startled, Ethan turned his head. Standing beside his table was a woman with brown hair loosely tied back, strands falling around her face in a way that made her look both tired and effortlessly beautiful. She wasn't dressed like the other diners, no glittering jewelry, no expensive fabrics. Instead, she wore a cardigan over a faded dress, and next to her stood a small boy with wide, curious eyes gripping her hand tightly. Ethan blinked. She wasn't a waitress, wasn't part of the staff. She must have been passing by, perhaps on her way out, when she noticed him. And yet, somehow, she'd read him instantly, cutting through all the practiced smiles he wore like armor. Ethan hesitated, then chuckled under his breath, lowering his voice. "You read me a little too well. This might actually be the worst blind date of my life." Her lips curved into a smile, not mocking, not pitying, just understanding. It was the kind of smile he hadn't seen in years, one that made his chest ache with something unfamiliar. "Then walk out," she said softly, as though offering the simplest solution in the world. "Life's too short to sit through what drains you." Her words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through him. Walk out. When was the last time he'd given himself permission to simply leave something behind without worrying about appearances, expectations, responsibilities? He glanced back at his date. She hadn't even noticed the exchange. She was too busy scrolling through her phone, muttering something about Instagram stories. Then he looked again at the stranger, at the little boy tugging at her sleeve and whispering about wanting ice cream. They didn't belong in this restaurant filled with polished laughter and curated elegance, and yet they felt more real than anything else around him. For the first time that evening, Ethan smiled for real. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and said simply, "You're right." Turning to his date, he offered a polite nod. "I'm sorry, but I don't think this is working out." I'll take care of the bill. Have a good evening. Her jaw dropped, a flash of indignation crossing her features, but Ethan didn't linger. He stepped away from the table, following the single mom and her boy out into the crisp night air. The city was alive outside. The glow of street lamps, the chatter of pedestrians, the scent of roasted chestnuts drifting from a nearby cart. Ethan felt lighter, as though he had set down a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. I hope I didn't ruin your evening, the woman said gently, adjusting the strap of her worn handbag on her shoulder. She looked nervous now, as though second-guessing her boldness inside. Her son tugged at her hand, his face lighting up at the sight of a neon ice cream shop across the street. Quite the opposite, Ethan replied honestly. I'm Ethan. She hesitated only a moment before saying, Claire. And this little whirlwind is Liam. Liam grinned, showing the gap where one of his front teeth was missing. Do you like ice cream? He asked with the blunt curiosity only a child could manage. Ethan laughed, the sound startling even himself. It had been so long since he'd laughed like that, without restraint. I love it. Then you should come with us, Liam declared, tugging on his mother's arm. Claire looked startled, embarrassed even, but Ethan raised his hand with a gentle smile. Only if that's okay with your mom, he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. Claire studied him for a moment, as though trying to read the truth behind his smile. She saw a man in an expensive suit, someone who clearly didn't belong in her world of tight budgets and second-hand shoes. But she also saw something else. Loneliness that mirrored her own, and a kindness she hadn't expected. Finally, she nodded. Just ice cream, she said firmly, as if setting boundaries for both of them. Ethan accepted that with a grateful nod, and together they crossed the street. Inside the little shop, the sweet smell of waffle cones and chocolate filled the air. Liam pressed his nose against the glass, trying to decide between strawberry and mint chocolate chip, while Claire watched him with a tenderness that made Ethan's chest tighten. As they sat at a small table with their cones, Liam happily devouring his choice, Claire quietly savoring hers, Ethan found himself asking questions he hadn't asked anyone in years. Do you come here often? He asked, then winced at how cliché it sounded. Claire chuckled. Not really. It's a treat. Things like this, I try to save for special days. There was no bitterness in her tone, just quiet acceptance. Ethan wanted to ask more, wanted to know everything. What she did, what her days looked like, what had left her carrying so much strength and weariness at once. But for now, he simply listened, content to sit in the glow of something real. When it was time to leave, Liam was sticky with melted ice cream and laughter. Claire gave Ethan a polite smile, adjusting her son's jacket. Thank you, for tonight. For not making me feel silly about stepping in back there. Ethan shook his head. Don't thank me. If anything, I should thank you. You might have saved me from the longest night of my life. They parted ways on the corner, Claire walking away with her son, disappearing into the stream of city lights. Ethan stood there for a long moment, watching them go, feeling something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in years, hope. He didn't know it yet, but that chance encounter outside a failed blind date would be the beginning of something far greater than he could have ever planned. The memory of that night lingered with Ethan long after Claire and Liam had disappeared into the city. For days, he caught himself thinking about the tired warmth in her smile, the honesty in her voice, and the way Liam had tugged at her hand with such trust. He had spent years in the company of people who measured worth by numbers, possessions, and appearances. But in the span of one evening, a single mom and her little boy had reminded him what it felt like to simply exist without pretense. He found himself looking for her again. At first, it was accidental. He happened to spot them in the park one afternoon, Liam racing down the slide while Claire sat on a bench with a paperback book in her lap. She noticed him almost immediately, her eyebrows arching in surprise, though not unkindly. You again, she said, a small laugh escaping her. Guilty, Ethan admitted, sliding his hands into his pockets. Do you mind if I sit? Claire hesitated, but Liam was already waving him over. Ethan, come see how fast I can go down the slide. That was how it started. Small encounters, fleeting conversations. But the more time Ethan spent with them, the more he realized he was beginning to crave those moments. He learned that Claire worked as a receptionist during the day and picked up shifts at a grocery store at night. He learned that Liam loved dinosaurs and hated broccoli, that he wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up, and that his laugh could brighten even the dullest of Ethan's days. One afternoon, as Liam bounced around the playground, Ethan sat beside Claire and finally asked what had been on his mind since the first night. "Do you ever get tired?" Claire blinked at him, startled. "Of what?" "Of holding everything together. Of being strong all the time." She gave a wry smile, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Every single day. But Liam deserves the best I can give him. And if that means I'm tired, then so be it." There was no bitterness in her tone, only quiet determination. Ethan studied her, admiration softening his features. He wanted to tell her that she deserved rest, joy, even indulgence, but he also knew she wouldn't accept pity. So instead, he offered something different. "What if I take you both to the Science Museum this weekend? Liam can see rockets and planets, and you can." He paused, realizing he wasn't sure how to finish. "Relax. Smile. Let someone else take care of things for once." Claire looked at him skeptically. "The Science Museum? That's oddly specific." Ethan chuckled. "Let's just say I did some research. Besides, I think Liam would love it." Liam, overhearing, came running over. "Museum. With rockets. Can we, Mom? Please, please, please." Claire sighed, but the sparkle in Liam's eyes was impossible to resist. She finally nodded. "All right, just the museum." That Saturday, Ethan was waiting outside the entrance when Claire and Liam arrived. Claire wore a simple blouse and jeans, her hair down for once, and Ethan found himself staring a second longer than he meant to. She looked both nervous and beautiful in a way she didn't seem to realize. Inside, Liam was unstoppable, darting from one exhibit to another, peppering Ethan with endless questions about planets and black holes. Ethan knelt beside him, answering patiently, pointing out details, and even pretending to be amazed when Liam taught him facts he'd read on the signs. Claire watched them from a short distance, her arms crossed but her expression soft. It was strange, seeing someone else step so easily into Liam's little world. Stranger still that her son seemed to adore him already. At one point, as Liam tried to launch a miniature rocket in an exhibit, Claire turned to Ethan. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. He frowned. "Doing what?" "This." She gestured toward Liam. "Spending your weekends with us. Men like you, they don't usually stick around when they see the reality of someone like me." Ethan's gaze softened. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Because for once, I don't feel like I'm performing. With you, with Liam, I'm just me. And I like that more than you know." Claire's breath caught. She wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had built walls around her heart. Still, when Liam tugged on Ethan's sleeve and begged him to come see the dinosaur skeleton, she didn't stop him. As weeks turned into months, those outings became a rhythm. Picnics at the park, afternoons at the library, evenings sharing takeout when Claire was too tired to cook. Ethan never pushed, never flaunted his wealth. If anything, he seemed careful to downplay it, showing up in jeans instead of suits, driving a modest car instead of the sleek luxury vehicles he usually kept. But no matter how hard he tried to blend into her world, there were glimpses of who he really was. Like the time he took a call in the park, his voice slipping into the commanding tone of a leader discussing acquisitions worth millions. Or when Liam asked him how he knew so much about airplanes, and Ethan admitted, a little sheepishly, that he owned one. It was Claire who finally confronted him. One evening, after Ethan had walked them home, she lingered at the door while Liam bounded inside. "You're not who you pretend to be," she said softly. Ethan exhaled slowly. "No, I'm not. I run a company. A big one. And yes, I have more money than I could ever need. But that's not what I want you to see." Claire crossed her arms, her eyes wary. "Then what do you want from me?" He stepped closer, his expression raw and unguarded. "I want to be with you. Not the CEO version of me. Just me. You and Liam make me feel like I'm not alone anymore." Her throat tightened. She had heard plenty of promises before, words meant to dazzle or disarm. But something in Ethan's voice, something in the way his eyes searched hers, felt different. "I can't give you glamour or luxury," she whispered. "All I have is me, and him." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "That's all I want." It wasn't easy. There were days when Claire pulled back, retreating into her fears, convinced that a man like Ethan couldn't truly belong in her world. And there were days when Ethan struggled to balance his empire with the simple life he craved with her. But slowly, piece by piece, trust grew. Liam, of course, was the bridge between them. His innocent joy, his unconditional acceptance, drew them closer in ways neither had expected. Ethan began helping with homework, attending school events, even reading bedtime stories when Claire had late shifts. More than once, Claire found herself standing in the hallway, watching Ethan with Liam, her heart aching with a mix of gratitude and fear. The turning point came one rainy evening. Claire had come home exhausted, her shoes soaked, her hair damp. She opened the door to find Ethan in her tiny kitchen, wearing an apron that barely fit him, flipping pancakes while Liam sat at the table giggling. "What are you doing?" Claire asked, stunned. Ethan looked up with a sheepish grin. Liam said pancakes make rainy days better. So, pancakes. Something inside her broke then. Not in the way that wounds break, but in the way walls crumble. She realized she wasn't just letting Ethan into her life, she wanted him there. Months later, Ethan brought them back to the very restaurant where they'd first met. The memory of that disastrous blind date felt like a lifetime ago. Tonight, the table was decorated with candles and roses, and Liam sat proudly beside Ethan, grinning from ear to ear. As Claire sat down, confused, Ethan knelt on one knee. The room quieted, diners turning to watch as the CEO who once commanded boardrooms now held out a small velvet box. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but brimming with emotion, "you walked me out of the worst night of my life and into the best chapter of it. You gave me laughter, love, and a family I never thought I'd have. Will you marry me?" Claire's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. She looked at Liam, who was practically bouncing in his seat, whispering, "Say yes, Mom. Say yes." Her voice trembled, but her answer was clear. "Yes." The restaurant erupted in applause. Liam threw his arms around Ethan's neck, and Claire's tears turned to laughter as she realized she had just said yes not only to a man, but to a future she had once thought impossible. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't a lonely CEO, and Claire wasn't just a poor single mom struggling to get by. Together, with Liam between them, they were something far greater, something whole.